like each of you to answer this. What constitutes probable cause?
My hands were a set of
You took my prompt. The old Jack Wagner thing.
Yeah.
What was the question?
What constitutes probable cause? And I do, I actually used this today with a victim.
Go ahead.
If these are a set of scales, anything that slightly tips it that way makes it more likely than not, that's probable cause.
And our Honorable Judge Wagner, who was on the bench many years ago, that was what she would use as her explanation for the defendants before they would plead guilty. And she would say, if my hands were a set of scales.
And that's actually who Judge Jackson replaced.
That's right.
Good question. Yes, sir?
So the general thing in the country right now is all these radical judges that are throwing out cases and deciding or if you're guilty by a jury, then there's one judge in Minnesota says, yeah, great, they do whatever they want. Are we having that issue in Knox County? Are you seeing it? Is that a problem here in Tennessee too?
Not at the Sessions Judge level. I'll let you answer, but
You're not entitled to a jury trial at Sessions Court level. Sessions Court operates as a gatekeeper and sort of a filter. If every case that was charged in Knox County, I think last year there were 75,000 cases that came through the Sessions Court. If we had to provide a jury trial on every one of those, the system would shut down. So Sessions Court operates as a probable cause court. You can plead to misdemeanors in Sessions Court. But if you want a jury trial, you've got to go through the hearing process or somehow get it bound over to the grand jury where it has grand jury review. If the grand jury finds a true bill and sends it on to criminal court, then you go to criminal court. You can also plead there, but that's where you get your jury trial. Sessions courts are not jury trial. You can have a bench trial, but everything that happens pretty much at a hearing level is appealable to another level. So that's really not an issue for the courts that we're operating and seeking a position for.
And if I could add, most of the cases that you hear about on the nationwide are federal, coming out of federal court, and or maybe the Court of Criminal Appeals, so they're not session stuff. And like Andrew was saying, they've got to go up to criminal court. You don't usually even hear that. In Knox County, I've done trials that have been televised and on TV, but that is nothing that the sessions level does. Jury trials are where you have 12 people who come in and decide whether people's guilty or not guilty. But when you hear stuff in the TV, that's usually talking things coming out of federal court or things that have been appealed to the Supreme Court.
yes, sir?
I just want to make a statement.
It's questions, buddy.
No,
Questions.
this is questionable behavior. Some years ago, when Andrea was, and this is not an endorsement of anyone, several years ago when Andrea was in the elder abuse, she spoke at one of the clubs. And one of those strange times when I actually paid attention. Some years later, as I'm taking care of my father, I got accused of elder abuse because he was losing so much weight. It was the illness. It wasn't anything. I went back on some of the things she said and put a doctor in his place and walked out there and they never bothered me again. So I still thank you for that.
Anybody?
Cool.
I had a question. How does the procedure work? I understand there's some kind of nomination committee and then does it go to an election after that?
Monday, the county commission will decide who will be the interim judge once Judge Jackson leaves at the end of December. So the commission, the three of us will be interviewing with the commission. Obviously, I'm on commission, I have to recuse myself, but they will decide Monday after the interview, select one of us. And then after that, whoever, whether they appoint somebody or whoever wants to run will have to be on the ballot come back. And then whoever wins that primary goes to the general election, and then the new elected judge will go into office September 1st.
And then whoever gets that position will also have to run again 4 years later, because Judge Jackson is retiring before the end of his term. So his term actually is not up until 2030.
a sessions judge term is actually 8 years. And it's sort of funny, whichever of the three of us get this position, on January 5th, we'll assume the bench in felony court. After it's been pretty much closed for 2 weeks, it's gonna be a disaster. And as I put in an email this morning, at the end of that day, the person is gonna look at themselves and say, what have I done? It's gonna be.
Careful what you ask for.
Careful what you ask for. It'll get better, but that first day is gonna be a doozy. Yes, sir.
Regardless of whoever is, wins the appointment on Monday, I will be on I'm planning on running regardless, I will be on the ballot.
Yes, sir.
Are there any Democrats or independents running for the same office?
It probably will be, but for the nomination, it's just the three of us who apply. But, you know, when the primaries open up, there may be a Democratic opponent.
I expect there will be a Democratic opponent in the general election in August. I'll be surprised.
And I
if
think the
there's not.
timeline might be a little different too, as far as picking up petitions. I've heard different things, that it might be a little later than normally it would, just because this circumstance has been a little unusual, timing wise, so I'm not real sure. But I believe the petitions to run will be due in February. I think.
Is the deadline, that is the deadline.
But I don't know when we're gonna be able to pick those
I
up.
think December 29th is when you can pick up your petition.
I think that's what it was supposed to be, but I've heard it might be later than that, but we don't really know. We're kinda operating on a need-to-know basis. I guess we don't need to know yet.
Yes, anybody else got one? Yes, sir.
Well, my first career, like I mentioned, I met my wife Karen in Los Angeles, and my first career there was deputy sheriff in Los Angeles County, and worked the streets, of course, but also bailiff for a while. Really learned a lot about the judicial system, and then on the streets I learned a lot about law enforcement and what they face there, obviously. You might think that I identify much more on the DA side than on the defendant side. But based on what I saw and what I experienced, I am and more in particular since then and over the decades, I'm coming smack down in the middle. And based on a lot of things I've seen, I just know there's some people doing the time that don't deserve to be there. Now, in law enforcement, if you have that probable cause, yeah, hey, so-and-so said you did, we'll have to sort it out, somebody probably gonna get arrested, you go to jail, and they have to defend themselves. Because two of you spend an awful lot of time on the DA side, how do you balance that and make sure that the defendants are gonna get a fair shake? And on the flip side of the coin, how do I know that you wouldn't be too sympathetic with the defendant?
Fair
I can
question.
answer for the prosecutor, for me personally. A job as a prosecutor is to seek justice. It is not my job to convict people. My job is to protect the rights of every individual in this community. That's the job of a prosecutor. There are times when I have walked up to that bench and dismissed cases because I did not have the evidence to go forward. I have spoken to defense attorneys and told them that I have problems with my case. This is the problem. I'm all about transparency. My job as a prosecutor is not to zealously advocate for the state, which is a defense attorney's job, to advocate for their clients. My job is to seek justice, whether that's dismissing a case or going and fighting all the way through a criminal court trial. So it's a very different role as a prosecutor. We are not there just to put people in jail.
As a defense attorney, I will say, we have to know the state's case. So we have to know our case just as well as the prosecutor does, because we have to determine whether or not they can make their case. And as a defense attorney, we're standing up all an army of the government. The prosecutor's office has the Knoxville Police Department, they have the Sheriff Department, they have the DEA, they have TBI, they have all the resources. A defense attorney, it's just us. So we have to look at the evidence, we have to look at what the state can prove, what they can't prove. And let me tell you, there's a lot of times I have to tell my client, this looks really bad for you. And it's very hard, you know, because everybody wants to say I didn't do it, right?
Yeah.
But
Been there.
when the evidence comes in and it favors the state, as a defense attorney, it's very hard to have to tell your client, you're gonna be convicted. You know, if you wanna go to trial, I'll go to trial and I'll sit with you and I'll be with you the whole way. But we have to make that call on a daily basis, that look, the evidence is overwhelming. I had somebody today who pled to a drug conspiracy, he was on the back and forth, back and forth. Our job as a defense attorney is not to get people out of crimes. And, you know, people sometimes say, how can you represent these bad people? Our job is not to represent somebody who's accused of a crime to get them out of jail. Our job is to guard our constitutional rights and make sure the government proves their case. So if somebody's guilty, and I will talk about a real heinous crime I had where there was a double murder just a few months ago. The evidence was terrible. As you can imagine, it was terrible. I had to go through all that and have my client evaluated to make sure he was competent. But it was overwhelming. And I had to tell my client, you will get convicted. That's not easy as a defense attorney to have a reality check with somebody because they think, your job is to get me out of this. That's not my job. My job cannot erase evidence, but my job can make sure that nobody doesn't get railroaded. And you say, well, we don't do that. Well, we know because of DNA, the government doesn't always get it right. Juries don't always get it right. Because of the Innocence Project and DNA, we've got over 250 people who have been released from prison, who maybe sometimes been in prison for 30 years. But DNA proved they weren't guilty. So we can't rely on the government making the choice all the time. We left England to come to America to have fair trials. So as a defense attorney, my job as a defense attorney is not to get people out of crime or think, I'm gonna look for ways to get you out of this. It's just to guard our constitutional rights. But as a defense attorney, a lot of times we're having to look at our client and say, this is bad. And so that's not the news that we want to be bearing, because when we've got our client, we've got a family, they've got family, there's somebody's son, somebody's daughter, somebody's mama, somebody's daddy, and to have to look at them and say, there's a high likelihood you're going to lose. We have to tell that bad news to them. So we have to have a real reality check, but it is not always like, we're just gonna get you out of this. And we're not always like trying to go, hey, we're on the government side, because let me tell you, they think we're on the government side too, right? They're like, well, you're on their side. It's like, no, we're not on their side. We're on the side of the Constitution. So we want safeguards in our system to make sure that law enforcement's protected, our laws are protected, but we also wanna make sure that anybody who's accused of a crime has the full constitutional protection, that makes sure the state has the burden to prove the case. We don't have to prove somebody's guilty. The state has to prove that. So as a judge in sessions, we're not making that call, right? We're not saying whether somebody's guilty. If somebody decides they're gonna plead to a misdemeanor, a session judge will take that plea. If they wanna plead to a felony, they cannot do that in sessions court. They have to go up to another court, to criminal court. But, I can guarantee you, as a defense attorney, we're not, it doesn't, if I get this position, and that's why I think it's critical that we can look at all sides. Because that's what a defense attorney has to do, and it's not easy. And as a judge, it's easy to transition when you're every day trying to look at all sides and make sure that the Constitution's protected. It's not an easy job. Like I said, being a defense attorney is not an easy job. But I think I'm very prepared to be a judge.
The one thing I would say, like I said, I've been a DA for 20 years. One of the things I am most proud of, I am probably considered one of the most fair DAs that there are. You know, I'm down the middle. You know, I'm fair to the defendants. And the funny thing is, whether you're represented by a high price attorney, you're representing somebody indigent as Rhonda, or whether you come in on your own, I'm gonna give you the same offer. It doesn't matter to me. I treat everybody the same, and I try and be fair across the board. That's all I can do.
And I'm the same way. I don't care if you've got the highest paid lawyer in town, or a public defender, or a court-appointed private attorney. I'm going to make the offer based on the evidence that I have in front of me. And in many cases, I've had defendants who try to plead guilty without a lawyer, and I won't make them an offer. I don't, they need an attorney to represent the rights. My job is to protect their rights, the victim's rights, your rights, his rights. That's what a prosecutor is supposed to do.
Thank you. You're making it tough to choose here.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, we're gonna thank this group, thank you all for coming.